Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chant, coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Thursday, February 3rd, 2022. And as always, if you'd like additional weather information, you can go to weather.gov and you'll see a map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii in the lower left. And when you click on that, it'll bring you to any point in the country. Get forecast, watches, warnings, advisories, check up on friends. Mentioned yesterday, have a sister down in Kentucky where they're getting that ice storm, and some areas there, western Kentucky, could see as much as a half to locally an inch of freezing rain. Bad news there as a frontal system extends from the lower Mississippi Valley on up through the northeast, providing a large zone for a mess of wintry weather, including heavy snow and freezing rain. Well, in our news, there was a decent display of the aurora, the northern lights, last night where it was clear, and we'll talk a bit more about that. We're going to continue to see a series of North Pacific and Gulf low pressure systems impact the state here as we head through the next couple of weeks. We are going to see some colder temperatures by early next week, especially across northern and the west side of the state. But some milder areas at times going to be creeping up into south central, southeastern Alaska, and also cause an above normal chance of precipitation through the mainland, especially between February 9th and the 15th. Well, taking a look at the current hazards, we have winter weather advisories, wind chill advisories there in the lower, I should say middle Yukon Valley, the central interior, north and west Fairbanks. We also have a high wind warning along the east side of Norton Sound, and winter weather advisories there on the western portion of the Seward Peninsula, as well as St. Lawrence Island. And as we go further south, we have blizzard warnings for the lower Kuskokwim River Delta, including Bethel, and a winter weather advisory that covers Dillingham and into the Kenai at least till 6 o'clock this evening, and then it's going to be allowed to expire. We are anticipating an inch or two of snow in the Anchorage Bowl as we go through this late afternoon and evening. Blizzard warning remains in effect for Thompson Pass, not far away from Valdez, and a winter weather advisory for the Copper River Basin, where as much as 4 to 8 inches of snow could fall as some of that moisture coming in off the Gulf translates a little further northward and into the southeast interior. We have widespread winter storm warnings for a combination of some locally heavy wet snow mixing in at times with some freezing rain from Yakutat down through Juneau and Sitka, and a winter storm warning also for the areas around Hyder in the far southeast part of the Panhandle. Well, last night we had would have been an impressive display of the aurora if skies were clear even in southern parts of the state, but that was not the case. We had a lot of cloud cover. On the right, I should say left side of the screen, you'll be able to see a chart, a graph showing green, orange, and red bars. And where you see the two bars that are in red, that's yesterday evening. We had a planetary K index. This is one of the measures of the magnetometers that are stationed about the Earth that kind of measure the Earth's geomagnetic disturbances. And we had a minor solar storm that triggered a minor geomagnetic storm, which would enhance the auroras. And on the right side of the screen, you'll see those much brighter aurora as the particle flux. The NOAA space weather models can kind of forecast the most likelihood where you're going to have a brighter aurora, and you can see those areas of red go right through the heart of central northern Alaska through the mainland. So again, if skies would have been clear last night, at least Anchorage on off to the south, we'd been able to see the northern lights. But this is what people saw from the sky cam up at Poker Flats there in Fairbanks. So let's take a moment to look at a short video clip. It's not the extent of the maximum aurora, but it at least gives you a hint of what was visible last night. Moving on, the longest lightning flash was another form of light that recently NOAA shared information. This occurred back on April 29th of 2020, and it is now a new record, a world record, according to the World Meteorological Organization. A thunderstorm complex swept southeastward across the central southern plains to along the Gulf of Mexico, and during this time frame, there was a flash of lightning along the length of this particular storm complex that was 477 miles long. So that's a very impressive record and a very impressive image, thanks to the geostationary global lightning mapper that this GOES 16 satellite has. Now, moving on to satellite imagery, you can see plenty of moisture streaming up through the Gulf, and some of that's making its way up into the Copper River Basin, and especially up through Yakutat on over toward the north end of the Panhandle. That's why we have the various winter storm warnings, winter weather advisories. Off to the north, we still have a ridge of high pressure extending from eastern Russia through the north slope into far northern northwest Canada. But the main weather feature right now is this bit of moisture that's working its way up through the Gulf. We're going to have a series of low pressure systems working their way out of the North Pacific up into the Gulf at times or into the Bering. And this overall pattern will keep a rather moist and milder flow of air into southwest, southern, southeastern parts of the state. Meanwhile, it will be turning colder, especially the northern half into the west side of the state as we go through later this weekend and at least early next week. And looking at the surface weather map, we have that one low today in the western Gulf, and that's responsible for the current weather going on. We have a stalled out front there through the central Bering and another low that's out there toward the western Bering. And then as we go through tonight, that low out through the north central Gulf will continue to sit there and gradually weaken as warmer air comes up into the Panhandle. The precipitation should be changing over to some rain, especially overnight and into Friday morning, especially along the outer portion of the Panhandle along the Gulf Coast. And tend to have all snowfall further north inland up there toward Haines and Skagway. But otherwise, for the day Friday, we see another little low there along the Alaska Peninsula with weakening lows extending from the lower Yukon into British Columbia, but still high pressure across the far northern part of the state. And finally, into Saturday, there will be yet another low there to the southeast of Kodiak Island, emerging into the southwestern Gulf. So look at the temperatures Friday morning, getting above freezing there across central and southern portions of the Panhandle. We'll see temperatures slowly rising as well across the south central interior, including areas around Anchorage, and temperatures will stay above freezing along coastal areas, especially through Kodiak Island. Temperatures Friday afternoon could hit 42 there at Kodiak, lower mid 40s on the outer portion of the Panhandle from, say, Sitka and Craig down toward Ketchikan. And then as we head through Saturday morning, we'll see temperatures still generally above freezing through the outer areas of the Panhandle and along the immediate Gulf Coast. And temperatures Saturday afternoon should get maybe a bit above freezing, even all the way up toward Anchorage and, say, Valdez. And definitely some 40-degree readings there back through the Panhandle and again at Kodiak Island. Coldest temperatures Friday morning, 20s and some 30s below. North slope, Arctic coast, south side of the Brooks Range into the Yukon Flats. As we go through Friday afternoon, temperatures still remain below zero in those areas, though coming up a bit around Norton Sound, Emenak, on over toward Nome, about 12 above. And then Saturday morning, more cold temperatures building back in there across the Brooks Range and north slope, especially north of the Yukon River. And temperatures Saturday afternoon will generally stay below zero north of the Yukon River, though moderate a bit toward the Alaska Range. For the southwest interior, temperatures overnight tonight will still be down near zero in places a little further up the Yukon and Kuskokwim rivers, otherwise coming upward along the southwest coast. For Friday afternoon, we should get temperatures creeping back up around freezing all the way along the length of the Alaska Peninsula, with some lower 40-degree readings possible, especially as you get out there, say from around False Pass down through the eastern part of the Aleutians, including Dutch Harbor. And Saturday morning lows will creep upwards a bit, mainly in the single digits to around 10 above, with readings generally above freezing from Kodiak Island southwestward. And temperatures on Saturday afternoon will again be around or just above freezing there from the west arm of the Alaska Range down along the Alaska Peninsula in through the Aleutians. So overall, as I was mentioning, see a brief milder spell there across the southwest and south central areas, especially along the coast. As we go into the early weekend, though, the colder air will try to build back in across northern and western parts of the state next week, at least early middle of next week. And as we look at the 6 to 10 day outlook, February 9th through the 13th, we are seeing the potential for above normal temperatures across the southeast third of the state and into the Panhandle. And I wouldn't rule out that to include south central areas around Cook Inlet as well. But at least in the meantime, later this weekend and especially early next week, some colder air is going to kind of work its way from the northern part of the state along the west central side of the state. And looking at precipitation, there is the potential with this overall pattern when you have a series of lows working their way out of the North Pacific through the Gulf and the Bering. We've seen this pattern before after the new year, and it did allow us to see some milder temperatures, but whenever we get mild air moving in on top of the colder air that's over the interior, that translates to some heavier precipitation, some more snowfall. So we would expect this trend as we transition toward the middle of February. And it's still looking like we could see above normal temperatures across south central areas into the southeast and southeast interior of the state as we head through mid-month around and just after Valentine's Day.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Looking at the aviation forecast, starting with flying weather on Friday morning, we will be watching a couple low pressure systems driving some IFR conditions there over the southern end of the Alaska Peninsula into the eastern Aleutians. The other system over there near the Gulf driving some IFR conditions into the Panhandle and northern Gulf area. Otherwise, some IFR conditions spread out across much of the interior over into the YK Delta. And some generally decent flying weather along the North Slope there, with generally marginal conditions along the Arctic coast and marginal conditions through much of the Bering Sea. For flying weather on Friday afternoon, again, continued IFR conditions with those couple of low pressure systems that are dissipating. IFR conditions along the Alaska Peninsula into the eastern Aleutians, and IFR conditions along the coastal mountains of the Panhandle into the northern Gulf region, and some lingering IFR conditions through portions of the interior over in the YK Delta. Otherwise, marginal conditions through the Bering Sea and Bristol Bay region, as well as the North Slope. For flying weather Saturday morning, again, some lingering IFR conditions in the Bristol Bay region, portions of the Matsu Valley and northern Gulf, and portions of the coastal mountains of the southeast. Otherwise, some marginal conditions along most of the North Slope with IFR conditions in portions of the Arctic coast, and marginal conditions spread throughout much of the Bering Sea. For Saturday afternoon, looking at IFR conditions there along the North Slope with high pressure building just off the coast there. Lingering IFR conditions through much of the interior, down through Bristol Bay region, and with the next system coming into the Gulf, IFR conditions spread out from the northern portion of the Panhandle into the Gulf region, over into Prince William Sound, and marginal conditions through much of the Bering Sea. For past conditions on Friday, AKwx VFR, same for Adigan with VFR conditions. Lake Clark and Merrill, IFR especially over Merrill, but improving to marginal conditions across Lake Clark. And rainy IFR conditions there. Windy IFR, Isabel IFR, and over into Mentasta you get into some marginal conditions there. Tanita IFR on Friday. Friday IFR conditions for Portage, and for Chilkoot and White IFR conditions down there in the northern Panhandle. Freezing levels Friday morning, looking at the surface freezing level cutting across the YK Delta into the southern end of the mainland over into British Columbia. Otherwise, elevated freezing levels there across the Gulf region with anywhere between 2,000 and 6,000 feet. Icing conditions on Friday with those two low pressure systems, one over there near the Panhandle bringing some considerable moderate areas for the Panhandle below 15,000 feet. Otherwise, the other area of considerable moderate over much of the Alaska Peninsula into the eastern Aleutians below 12,000 feet there. Otherwise, isolated moderate across much of the southern mainland with 15,000 feet and below 8,000 feet over portions of the North Slope. For the jet stream, low pressure system out there in the western Aleutians, counterclockwise flow around that low. Otherwise, light and variable across the mainland with a jet streak in the Gulf region with 135 knots there. Westerlies driving into the Panhandle with 65 to 80 knots there. Again, westerlies across that region. For 9,000 foot winds on Friday, low pressure systems across much of the Alaska region, from one out there in the Aleutians, another near Bristol Bay, and one over into Yukon Territory. Otherwise, some strong winds in more of a southwesterly flow with 70 to 80 knots there, 50 to 75 knots in more a northwesterly flow across the Panhandle. For the 3,000-foot winds on Friday, looking at, again, that low-pressure system near Bristol Bay driving some westerlies into the Gulf region, anywhere between 50 and 55 knots into the Panhandle, light and variable across much of the mainland. And for turbulence on Friday, again with those low-pressure systems, a couple areas of considerable moderate expected across the portions of the Panhandle, below 6,000 feet there, and below 4,000 feet over in the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, and below 4,000 feet over there in the Seward Peninsula.
Hey Star Spectators, I'm Trace and I'm counting down the 5 brightest objects this week. Let's go.
Number 1.
Face southeast, draw a line through Rigel and Bellatrix and Orion, and you'll run right into Capella and Auriga.
Number 2.
Vega will rise in the northeast around 2 a.m. and has a magnitude or brightness of exactly 0 because all other stars are based on it.
Number 3.
Follow the arc to Arcturus from the Big Dipper's handle, and bam, the 3rd object on our list in Boötes.
Number 4.
Sirius the Dog Star will hit the southwest sky after 2 a.m. Follow Orion's belt to the left to spot it.
Number 5.
Just before sunrise, Venus will shine in the east. Planets are always bright, but Venus is really bright right now. Enjoy. Bonus point, the true brightest object is our closest star, the Sun. Take it all in and then take a nap after a long night of epic stargazing, and keep looking up.
The beluga whale, also known as the white whale, lives in large groups and are unusual among whales. They have no dorsal fin, large bulbous heads, and they can actually swim backwards. To feed, they produce sound to find and hunt fish and invertebrates, and they use sound to communicate.
They're also known as the canaries of the sea because they make such a diversity of noises. They make chirps and whistles and gurgles and trumpeting sounds. They just make all kinds of sounds.
In the U.S., beluga whales live in the cold waters of Alaska, and there are 5 separate populations. Of those 5, the Cook Inlet population is the smallest, and has declined by about 75%. Subsistence hunting may have contributed to this initial population drop, but this practice was regulated starting in 1999, with the last hunt in 2005. Still, the beluga population here has yet to recover.
We listed Cook Inlet beluga whales as an endangered species under the Endangered Species Act in 2008, and we had hoped that the population would start recovering, but we are still seeing a continued decline. And these beluga whales are only found in Cook Inlet, so if they go extinct, we don't think any other belugas will come back and populate this area.
These whales spend most of their summer near Anchorage, Alaska's largest city, where threats to belugas are on the rise as the city grows. These may include diminishing food, habitat loss or destruction, pollution, toxins, and human-caused noise, which hampers their ability to feed and communicate. Researchers are trying to understand which of these threats may be impacting them most, but Cook Inlet is a tough place to work.
It's really hostile for research. We have the strong tides, which makes it challenging for human safety, and we can't see through the water. It is very muddy, so we're pretty much limited to the part of the animal that breaks the surface of the water. And as a result, we have limited information about the specific population dynamics of Cook Inlet beluga whales.
Up until recently, information has mainly come from annual aerial surveys from aircraft, and boat or shore-based photo identification surveys that use unique markings to tell animals apart. Scientists also use passive acoustics to listen for belugas, but none of these methods can detect much information about their health,
So it's really been a game changer with the whole species in the spotlight designation. We've gotten more resources within our agency.
For instance, we're able to use a drone to collect some aerial imagery of belugas in the wild, and we're hoping to learn some information about the age classes, information about the health status.
And probably the most important bit of information that we'll get out of that is we'll be able to identify the new calves. And we're hoping if we keep doing this every year, we'll be able to get an estimate of calf production every year that will tell us something about how well the population's doing.
We are also expanding upon our biopsy studies, hopefully to give us some information about sex, the individual's reproductive status, some genetic information, some contaminant loads.
Public and private partners are contributing as well. Some are looking at toxin levels in the whale's prey, while others are analyzing beluga teeth to learn about their age and past diet. Others monitor water quality and how belugas react to boats, and more check to see if their behavior changes with increased background noise. All of these findings will go toward developing effective recovery strategies for this population.
As for what you can do, if you're out boating, give belugas space. Don't drive right up next to them. Stay about 100 yards away. If you're flying over them, just remember that you're putting noise into the water as well, and so stay at least 1,500 feet above them. Report a stranded beluga whale as soon as possible, and that's if they're dead stranded or live stranded. The amount of information that we can learn from these animals by responding to a stranding is monumental, and it will help our efforts to recover them.
Together we can help beluga whales thrive in the dynamic waters of Cook Inlet. With continued research and good stewardship, we hope to see this population grow in the years to come.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and looking at the sea ice edge, we continue to see extensive ice throughout the north, central, and areas of the eastern Bering Sea, especially along the southwest and west coast of the state. And we will see winds continue from the northeast and north, turning a bit more northwesterly. So this is going to cause the ice to want to shift southward and to some extent still a bit westward, though we still see the islands there, St. Paul, St. George, ice-free, but the ice is off to the north there surrounding St. Matthew. And looking at the winds, starting with the southeast, we have some gale force winds there, central northern panhandle coast, 35 to 40 knots with waves upwards around 25 feet or so. The inner channels winds will be south 20-25 knots with some gusts at 40 knots around Petersburg, but northerly winds on the Lynn Canal with waves of 4 feet. On Saturday, those winds, at least across the north, will come down a bit. Generally south-southeast winds, but as high as 40 knots with some 7-foot waves down toward Metlakatla. And we expect 40 to 45 knot gales along the Gulf Coast, with waves generally from 15 to near around 20 feet. Across the northwest Gulf, winds will be out of the west over the open waters on Friday, 30 knots, waves 10-14 feet. 20-knot west winds with 3-foot waves in Prince William Sound, and generally west winds 15 knots with 3-foot waves in the lower half where the water is open there in the lower portion of Cook Inlet. For Saturday, got another low that'll be moving up into the Gulf through the west end, and we do expect gales as high as 35, 45 knots there in the open waters, with even some approaching 50-knot storm force winds there just to the southeast. Off the entrances there of Prince William Sound. Prince William Sound, 35-knot winds out of the east, and northeast winds 30 to 35 knots through lower Cook Inlet. Across Kodiak Island on Friday, winds will be south-southeast 20 to 30 knots. We do see 40-knot gales from the south and southwest off the North Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, with waves around 30 feet as you get further offshore from Sand Point. East-northeast winds 25 to 30 knots on the Bering side. And then for Saturday, winds will be northerly through Shelikof Strait, more westerly there as you get southward there, 20-25 knots just off of the Alaska Peninsula on the North Pacific side, and west to northwest around 20 knots on the Bering side. Across the Aleutians, winds, the eastern Aleutians will be out of the north-northwest 20-25 knots or so, turning southerly again, though, once you get around and west of Atka and Adak. And by Saturday, rather quiet, especially throughout the much of the central portion of the Aleutians. Variable winds only around 10 knots, waves generally 5 to 10 feet at best. Across the west and southwest coast, we continue to see northeasterly winds on Friday, 25 to 30 knots over the ice, so that ice is going to want to shift south and westward, though variable winds 10 knots in the vicinity of St. Paul and St. George. Winds by Saturday will turn a bit more northwesterly, around 25 to 30 knots, especially from around St. Matthew and Nunavik Island northward through St. Lawrence and Norton Sound. Along the Arctic coast, winds will be out of the southwest, generally 10 to 15 knots, a little stronger, 25 knots there at Utqiagvik. And then going down along the length of the northwest coast into the lower Chukchi Sea, winds will go northwest and northerly 15 to 20 knots, accelerating upwards to 30 knots through the Bering Strait off of the western portion of the Seward Peninsulas. And then for Saturday, look for winds to be out of the west, 15 to 20 knots, especially east of Utqiagvik there along the Arctic coast, and then generally out of the northwest there through the lower Chukchi Sea, 15 to 20 knots, accelerating to 30 knots through the Bering Strait and on the north side of St. Lawrence Island and the western portion of the Seward Peninsula. So overnight tonight into early Friday morning, we have low pressure in the north central Gulf, producing heavier snowfall along the south central interior up in the Copper River Basin in the north end of the Panhandle. Snow will mix with freezing rain and change to rain, especially the outer portion of the Panhandle as we go through the day Friday. And we'll be watching yet as we head into Saturday another low approaching from the North Pacific up into the southwestern Gulf, and that will bring a renewed threat of snow and mixed precipitation along the Gulf Coast and Panhandle as we go through the weekend. And we also expect some colder air to sit up across the northern and western part of the state.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.